In your book, you talk about the comparison of Jesus and James Bond to help unpack culture's view of masculinity. So talk about that a little bit. In what ways do you see culture has impacted our view of true masculinity and through that lens of James Bond?
Yeah, so the first pushback that I always get when I start talking about these statistics is, well, wait a minute, haven't we all heard that evangelicals divorce at the same rate as the secular culture? And so the researchers went back to the data and they separated out truly authentic, committed Christian men who attend church regularly from nominal Christian men. By the way, my students don't know what the word nominal means. So I have to tell them, it means in name only, because NOM is Latin for name. And so these are men who, in a survey like this, might check the Baptist box, but who actually attend church rarely, if at all.
Yeah.
And they test out even worse than secular men. So they are, this is answering your question, because they are taking their lead from the secular culture. Their wives report the lowest level of happiness. They are the least engaged with their children. They have the highest rates of of divorce, higher than secular couples, and they have the highest rates of domestic abuse and violence, higher than secular men. So apparently these are men who are claiming an evangelical Christian identity, but they're taking words like headship and submission from the Bible and not giving them the biblical meaning, kind of like skimming the headlines. Instead, they're infusing it with the cultural meanings. So they're infusing it with meanings of dominance and entitlement and like you said, I get my own way. This is what authority means. So this is where you really see the impact in the church of the secular culture. It's particularly among those men who claim Christianity, but are hanging around sort of the fringes of the Christian world and actually thinking like secular men.
Yeah. I think that's what I really liked about your example is, James Bond is a really, like, everyone knows who we're talking about when we say that. It's a womanizer who's slick, who's really in good shape, and is
always
this,
beats the bad guy.
Yeah, an international spy and really cool, and and gosh, I grew up, Daniel Craig was my James Bond. Like, I wanted to be Daniel Craig, especially after that first, Casino Royale, that first scene where he's chasing the guy. But I think that what you've kind of explored is that template gets copied and pasted over our society, that somehow that's what it means to be a true man, to not trust women, to womanize, to be violent and angry, to not show emotion. And that's not who Jesus was. And so yet we still take that James Bond mentality and then put it over our life. And that's how we judge whether we're really masculine or not, or really valuable or not.
Yeah, like you, I hang out mostly with fairly committed Christian men. And so I started this thinking that the nominals would be a fairly small group. Well, no, they're not. We have a lot of cultural Christianity in America, unlike the rest of the world. And so we do have a lot of nominal Christians. At least one study I found said that the sheer numbers were the same. The numbers of committed Christians and nominal Christians are the same. So you have about a 50-50 chance that if you run into somebody who claims to be a Christian, that they're actually just nominal, and they're actually, like you said, have more of a James Bond understanding of masculinity rather than a biblical view of masculinity. So that was a little disturbing when I found out the sheer numbers. And that does explain, say, the Church Too movement, that not, by the way, not my students don't know that word either, but the Me Too movement, which exposed a lot of sexual exploitation in the secular world, was followed by the Church Too movement against sexual exploitation in the Christian world. And so, and I would say, that's almost certainly nominal Christian men. That's why those numbers are where they are. But by the way, it does mean that you can't put these two together. A lot of studies will put them together. So they'll end up having evangelical men who are better than the secular world, and then they'll have nominal men who are worse than the secular world. And if you put those two together, just say, let's do a study on evangelicals, you're going to get skewed numbers. And so that explains a lot of the numbers we see and why they're mistaken.
It occurs to me that in a lot of areas, whether it's toxic masculinity or many other topics, we can use the banner of Christianity to excuse a lot of bad behavior. because in the name of male headship, like you've explained, in the name of male headship, we've claimed that banner, and yet we've executed it in a way that is clearly unbiblical. And I think that's something we all have to be on guard of, is am I using my faith to actually justify poor behavior that really isn't actually consistent with my faith?
Exactly. I often get people asking, why in the world would nominal men be actually worse than the secular world? Doesn't a little bit of Christianity help? Well, apparently not, because what they're doing is they're taking the secular definition of masculinity, the James Bond definition, but they feel religious permission. They feel that the church is giving them permission because they're using Christian language. And so ironically, they're getting the worst of both worlds, and they're ending up worse than secular men. And so we have to be aware of that when people, the media criticisms of evangelical men, we have to help people to realize that yes, part of that is true, but those are nominal Christian men who are actually being influenced not by the Bible, but by the secular culture. And by the way, that's an important distinction I found you have to make with people, because of course they assume if you're claiming Christianity, then Christianity is causing this bad behavior. No, actually, you're using Christian labels on what is secular, a secular script for masculinity. And that's why I spent a lot of the book, by the way, just explaining what is the secular script for masculinity, where did it come from, how did it develop, because you cannot really counter a cultural trend unless you know where it came from and how it developed, because it is seeping into the church, especially through people who are more nominal.
Yeah. And I think it's, I want to keep moving forward in the conversation, but another thing just to mention is that if the church is silent when it comes to what true biblical masculinity looks like, then where am I going to go? I'm going to go to the culture. I'm going to go to where I'm hearing it, or seeing it on the screen or reading it in books. And so I think that's something that the church should be aware of, that it should be something we should be pouring more and more into, understanding what masculinity is, what true headship looks like, what being a servant-hearted man looks like. So